What if the wealthiest man in Malibu, the one who owned glass towers, private jets, and a mansion above the Pacific, found his entire empire shaken not by rivals or scandal, but by a shivering 7-year-old girl who asked to sleep in his horse stable during a storm? If stories of redemption, healing, and unexpected family touch your heart, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that bring light into dark places. Thank you. The rain came sideways off the Pacific that night, driven by winds strong enough to rattle the eucalyptus trees lining the cliffs above Malibu. Waves slammed against black rocks below, each crash echoing like cannons across the dark water. The storm was one of those rare tempests that stripped Malibu of its glamour and revealed it as a raw piece of coastline, wild and merciless. Out on the rain-lashed road, a small figure trudged against the wind. 7-year-old Lily hugged a stuffed bear so ragged its seams bulged with tufts of cotton. Her jacket, once pink, had faded to gray and clung to her in heavy folds. Water ran from her curls into her eyes, blurring her view of the road. Every step sank into puddles that seeped cold through her shoes, but she pressed forward because she knew stopping meant surrendering to the night. She had walked for hours. The last memory of her mother was a slammed door, words half shouted into the dark. By dawn, she was alone. Her stomach pinched with hunger, but worse than hunger was the gnawing ache of fear, the knowledge that there was nowhere in the world meant for her. Through sheets of rain, she spotted it. A white mansion perched on a rise above the highway, its walls glowing faintly through the storm. But Lily's eyes did not linger on the mansion. She saw instead the stable beside it, tall, wooden, smelling faintly of hay even through the downpour. To anyone else it was an outbuilding, but to her it was a promise, a roof, even if only for one night. She stumbled up the gravel driveway, each stone biting her soaked feet. Her bear slipped once from her grasp, nearly carried away by the water, but she snatched it back, whispering, "It's okay, Benny. We'll be safe." Inside the mansion, Jonathan Reed stood before a wall of glass that framed the storm. At 44, he was the man boardrooms whispered about, the CEO who never hesitated, the investor who turned recessions into opportunity. His empire stretched from New York towers to San Francisco tech hubs, but none of it reached his heart. His life was precise, ordered, encased in silence. He lifted his glass of scotch, untouched, and stared into the night. Then he saw it, movement near the stable. At first he thought it was a stray dog. Lightning cracked the sky, and for an instant the world turned white. He saw her, a child, alone, drenched, pushing against the stable door with arms too small to budge it. Jonathan's chest tightened. He told himself to call security. Malibu drew trespassers, some desperate, some dangerous. But instead of picking up his phone, he reached for an umbrella. Against the voice of reason, he walked into the storm. The stable smelled of cedar and rain-damp hay. Horses stamped nervously in their stalls. And there, in the corner, was the girl. She had managed to slip inside, curled on the floor with her bear clutched to her chest. Her lips quivered, her body trembling, yet her eyes met his with a defiance too old for her years. "Who are you?" His voice came out harsher than intended. She flinched but didn't run. Her answer was small, nearly drowned by thunder. "Please, mister. Just one night. I don't need your house. Just the stable. I'll be quiet. Benny and we won't cause trouble." Jonathan froze. In his world, people begged him for millions. Governments courted him for donations. Rivals cursed him for their ruin. But never had anyone asked him for something as small or as devastating as a night's shelter in a horse stable. Just one night. The words sliced through him, cutting deeper than lawsuits or losses ever had. Children didn't ask for stables if they had anywhere else to go. He looked at her and, for the first time in years, felt the armor around his chest crack. "Come with me," he said softly. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "You mean inside? Your house?" He nodded, extending a hand, awkward and uncertain. After a pause, she placed her trembling fingers in his. They were ice cold. He led her from the stable. Rain hammered the umbrella, but she stayed close, her tiny frame leaning into him as though she might be swept away otherwise. The front door opened, spilling golden light into the storm. Lily stopped at the threshold, wide-eyed at the marble floors and sweeping staircase. To Jonathan, it was merely architecture. To her, it was another world. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then began to sob, her words breaking. "Thank you, just for the warm air." "Thank you." Jonathan had no answer. He only knew that his life, ordered, sealed, untouched, had just been breached by a little girl with nothing but a bear and a plea for one night's shelter. As the door shut behind them, sealing out the storm, Jonathan felt a strange weight settle on his chest. Not the heaviness of wealth or empire, something else, something terrifying and fragile, responsibility, and though he could not admit it yet, hope. The storm still battered the cliffs, but inside the mansion the world seemed untouched. Warm light glowing from chandeliers, polished floors gleaming beneath Jonathan Reed's steady stride. Lily clung to her stuffed bear with both hands, her small shoes squeaking on the marble entryway. She glanced up at the vaulted ceiling, where crystal prisms dangled like frozen raindrops. The sheer size of the room dwarfed her. Every surface seemed to echo her presence back at her, as if the house itself was astonished she had crossed its threshold. To Jonathan, this was routine. He barely noticed the copper trim on the staircase or the oil paintings on the walls. He had walked past them 1,000 times without seeing them. But through Lily's eyes, the mansion was transformed into something surreal, a palace far beyond anything she had imagined. "Come," Jonathan said gently, guiding her across the hall. They passed a dining table that stretched longer than any classroom Lily had ever sat in. Chairs with velvet cushions stood unused, their legs sharp against the pristine floor. On the far wall, a piano gleamed, its lid closed, untouched. Lily slowed, staring at it. She had only seen pianos in shop windows, never so close. Jonathan caught her gaze. "Do you play?" She shook her head quickly, pressing the bear tighter against her chest. "No. I just listen when people play on the street." Jonathan paused, surprised by the softness of her answer. Music had been absent from this house for years. The silence had seemed fitting, protective. Yet now, standing with a child at his side, the quiet felt almost oppressive. He opened another door and motioned her inside. It was the bathroom, and to Lily it might as well have been a magical chamber. The walls were ivory stone, the counters gleamed with glass bottles, and from the faucet ran a stream of clear water steaming into the air. Lily froze. She had seen water from taps before, cold, metallic trickles in shelters or gas station sinks, but never like this, never clean and endless, never warm enough to chase away the chill. Jonathan knelt by the tub, adjusting the temperature. "You need heat," he said quietly. "Take your time." He placed a thick towel on the rack and straightened. Lily didn't move. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "Warm water. Is it really for me?" Jonathan felt something twist inside him. She wasn't asking for toys or treats. She was asking if she could truly have something as simple as hot water. "Yes," he said firmly. "For you." Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time since she had appeared at his stable, Jonathan saw the fragile possibility of trust. He stepped back to give her space, then closing the door softly behind him. For a moment, he leaned against the wall, listening. The rush of water filled the silence, and then, barely audible, came a sound that startled him. A laugh. Small, shaky, half sob, half joy. Jonathan closed his eyes. The sound was unfamiliar here, but it was exactly what the house had needed. Downstairs, he settled in the kitchen. Stainless steel counters reflected the overhead lights, every surface spotless. The staff came only twice a week, leaving meals portioned and labeled, but Jonathan had sent them home early before the storm began. Tonight, it was just him. He opened the refrigerator and stared at shelves filled with imported cheeses, bottles of wine, packages of food he rarely touched. None of it seemed right for a child. After a moment, he found milk. He poured it into a saucepan, heating it slowly, watching steam curl upward. The act was oddly grounding, like reacquainting himself with a skill long forgotten. When Lily emerged from upstairs, her hair damp and curling around her face, she wore one of Jonathan's oversized shirts. It hung nearly to her knees. She padded into the kitchen barefoot, clutching her bear. Looking smaller than ever against the steel and stone, Jonathan slid a mug of warm milk across the counter. "Drink." She hesitated, then lifted it with both hands. The steam fogged her cheeks. She took a sip and froze. Tears welled in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Jonathan asked quickly. Her voice broke. "It's warm. Nobody ever gave me warm milk before." Jonathan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. He only sat there watching her drink as though she was memorizing the moment, afraid it might vanish. When she finished, she set the mug down carefully, as if it were the most valuable object in the room. Her voice was small but steady. "Thank you." Jonathan studied her, this fragile, drenched child who had walked out of a storm into his fortress of solitude, and realized he had no plan for what came next. He had built a life around contracts, forecasts, predictable outcomes. Yet nothing in his empire had prepared him for her simple gratitude. "Come," he said again, his voice softer than before. He led her upstairs, down a quiet hall lined with closed doors. He stopped at a guest room, pulling back the covers on the bed. The linens were crisp, untouched. "You'll sleep here," he said. Her eyes widened. "In a bed? Just for me?" "Yes, just for you." She climbed onto the mattress, sinking into the softness as though it were clouds. Her bear nestled beside her. She turned her face toward him, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I'll be quiet," she whispered. "I promise." Jonathan lingered in the doorway. He had heard promises all his life, from business partners, from politicians, from people who would sell their souls for a deal. None of them had ever sounded as true as the vow of this child. "Good night, Lily," he murmured. She closed her eyes, her breathing steadying. For the first time in years, the house felt less like a monument to silence and more like a place where something human could grow. Jonathan pulled the door halfway shut, leaving a slice of warm light across the room. As he walked back down the hall, his mind turned over the unlikeliest thought. Perhaps she had not arrived by accident. Perhaps storms sometimes delivered not destruction, but beginnings. Dawn slid in on a pale ribbon of light. The storm spent. The air rinsed clean. From the balcony, the garden looked washed and new. Hibiscus petals held pearls of water that trembled in the breeze. Somewhere down the cliff, the Pacific breathed, slow and even, like a giant asleep. Jonathan woke before the house, the way he always did. Habit had trained him to rise at an hour when markets were quiet and thoughts were loud. He tied his robe and moved down the hallway, passing the guest room where a thin line of lamplight still showed beneath the door. He paused, listening. The soft, steady rhythm of a child sleeping had a way of shrinking the corridor and everything in it, paintings, mirror, years of accumulated distance, until all that remained was the sound itself. He kept walking, not trusting himself to open the door. In the kitchen, the steel and stone gave back his reflection. He filled a pot with water, then changed his mind and set out a saucepan. Milk felt right. He warmed it slowly, watching the first plumes of steam unwind. While it heathed, he found a tin of butter biscuits in the pantry, still wrapped in paper that crinkled like dry leaves. By the time the floorboards upstairs creaked, the kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla. Lily appeared in the doorway wearing one of his white shirts, the cuffs rolled and still too long, the hem grazing her knees. Her hair had dried into loose curls through the night. She held her stuffed bear as if it were a passport that could prove she belonged wherever she stood. "Morning," Jonathan said, and realized how unfamiliar the word sounded in his own voice. She gave a tiny nod. "Morning." He poured the milk into a mug and slid it across the counter. Lily climbed onto a stool, feet not quite reaching the rung, and wrapped both hands around the cup. She blew gently and took a careful sip. The steam fogged her lashes. He set the biscuits between them without a speech, without insistence. Just there. She reached for one, relief softening her shoulders. She nibbled the edge, swallowed. Then, as if a string inside her tightened, she curled the remaining half into her palm. Her gaze flicked down, then up to check whether he'd seen. He had, and he pretended not to. A minute later, when she thought his attention had drifted to the window, the half-biscuit disappeared into the pocket of his oversized shirt. The movement was so practiced it didn't look sneaky, only old as nights behind locked doors and mornings when the first task is to make the second possible. "Do you like the square ones better?" Jonathan asked lightly. "Or the round?" Lily's hand froze over the tin. She searched his face for the trap and, finding none, picked up a square. "The corners last longer," she said after a beat, almost apologetic. "You can make more bites." He nodded, as if she had explained a market strategy he wished he'd thought of first. Good thinking. He turned away under the pretense of the stove and, without ceremony, slid a small ceramic bowl from the cupboard. The kind guests once used for olives he never served. He filled it with an armful of biscuits and set it beside her mug. "This one," he cleared his throat, "this one's yours. It stays with you. If it empties, we fill it. No questions." Something inside her lifted, then checked itself. "Even if I don't finish fast?" "Especially then." She rested her palm on the rim like a pledge. When the mug was empty, he asked if the shirt was comfortable enough and if she'd like socks. She nodded to both. He opened a drawer and hesitated, realizing he owned only running socks and dress socks that came in pairs like brief peace treaties. He found a cotton pair the color of morning fog and set them on the counter. Lily pulled them on, heels sliding forward in slow delight. They wandered the house as the light grew. The piano, closed the night before, threw back a dull gleam. Lily slowed. "Can I touch it?" "You can sit," Jonathan said. "Keys are heavier than they look." She perched on the bench and laid 3 fingers on ivory, like a secret. The first note came thin and shy, the second steadier, the third a little braver. She didn't know chords. She knew the shape of sound, how it could fill a room without taking anything from anyone. Jonathan stood in the doorway and felt the house change shape around her. Edges softened, corners learned patience. When she tired, they continued. He showed her the laundry room where the scent of clean cotton lived, the linen closet with towels folded like quiet clouds, a drawer in the mudroom where he placed the ceramic biscuit bowl as if christening a tiny harbor. "Here," he said, tapping the wood. "Easy to remember." "Easy to reach," she corrected, and the corner of his mouth learned a new curve. In the afternoon, he found a cardboard box in a storage room and brought it to the little guest room, the one with a low window to the garden and a shelf that had never held anything but dust. He folded the box open on the floor and said, "We can use this for your things." She looked at the empty square and shrugged. "I don't have things." "You will." He said it as if he were talking about weather fare as a promise. They made a game of it anyway. A drawer for socks, a hanger for the cotton dress they'd get soon, a spot on the shelf for her bear when he needed to rest. Lily placed Benny there and then snatched him back, embarrassed by how quickly loneliness tried to creep in when his button eye wasn't within reach. When evening softened the garden, the housekeeper came by with a package, pajamas Jonathan had ordered that morning, soft and sky blue, a size too big on purpose. After the woman left, he sat with Lily cross-legged on the rug while she peeled away tissue paper with the seriousness of a job. She held the fabric against her shoulders and grinned without showing teeth, a shy son. Dinner was simple because simple was certain. A bowl of chicken broth with noodles, a slice of bread, an apple cut in tidy wedges that he lined like little boats. Lily ate in small, quick bites. And once, when he looked down to answer a text he didn't send, 2 wedges slipped into the front pocket of the pajama top. He said nothing. When she glanced up, braced for correction, he only slid the plate an inch closer. Trust was a country. You crossed it by miles of inches. "Do you go to school?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. When it's close by." The sentence trailed off as if the rest belonged to a different room. He didn't press. He asked instead if she liked stories. She nodded, so he reached for a book from a shelf no one used. Fairy tales in plain language. He began reading, voice rusty, discovering that his chest knew how to steady itself to a child's breath. When the vowels found their rhythm, Lily's head tipped to his shoulder the way tired birds turn to the wind and trust it. Halfway through a chapter, she startled and sat straighter. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" "It's all right," he said. "You can lean." They finished the story about a miller's daughter who learns the price of names. When he closed the book, the house felt like it had placed a hand on its own heart to count the beats. At bedtime, the small room seemed less small. He turned down the sheet and smoothed the cover with a care that made him unfamiliar to himself. Lily climbed in and lay on her side, Bear held in the crook of her arm. She looked at the lamp, then at him. "Could you leave it on a little?" He adjusted the dimmer until the light settled into a low, kind glow. "Like this?" She nodded. "Sometimes the dark is too loud." He stood a moment, trying to understand the music of that sentence. Then he went to the window and drew the sheer curtain so the night could rest on the other side of the glass without pressing its face against it. "Do you need anything else?" he asked from the doorway. Her mouth opened, then shut. She fumbled under the pillow and took out the square biscuit she'd saved, considered it and slid it back. A private treaty with tomorrow. "No," she said at last. "I'm okay." He nodded. "I'll be down the hall." She blinked. "If I call, I'll come." He left the door not quite closed. In the hallway, he stood still until the quiet inside the room turned from listening to sleeping. Then he went to his office, a room that usually received him the way a vault receives a key. He didn't sit at the desk. He opened a drawer, found a yellow legal pad, and wrote 3 lines with the blunt honesty of a man learning to put ink where his life already was. Milk, warm, before bed. Nightlight, dim. Bowl, refill morning, and always. He tore the page free and folded it, not because he needed the reminder, but because keeping it felt like permission. On the way back to his room, he passed the mudroom, checked the ceramic bowl, still half full, and, without thinking, tucked 2 more biscuits in. He paused, hand on the rim, and felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with law or signatures. It was a rhythm, the kind you find by listening to the feet of someone smaller than your stride and changing the length of your step to match. In the garden, the hibiscus shook off the last drops of the night. The ocean breathed its steady breath. Upstairs, a child slept with a bear and a biscuit under her pillow, and a man who had spent his life chasing certainty discovered a different kind, the kind that arrives as a promise you make quietly and keep in 100 small ways. He stood at the threshold of the little room once more, not entering, only letting the soft light paint a line across his shoes. The word for what he was doing did not matter. The doing did. "Good night, Lily," he whispered, to the air, to the future, to whatever had brought her to his door. The house listened, and at last began to learn the sound of belonging. The next morning broke brighter than anyone expected. The storm had scrubbed the sky, leaving Los Angeles spread out in sharp lines of color. Blue overhead, green palms shivering in the light, the streets steaming faintly where rainwater dried. Jonathan's black sedan moved smoothly down the Pacific Coast Highway, Lily tucked in the back seat beside him. She wore a simple cotton dress they had picked out together at a boutique in Malibu before heading downtown, her bare Benny balanced carefully on her lap. She pressed her face against the glass, drinking in the speed of the passing world. For a child who had walked alone in storms, the sensation of moving forward without her own small legs carrying the weight was wonder enough. The city stretched around them like an unfolding map. Jonathan watched her reflection in the window. There was something both fragile and fierce in the way she sat, her chin tilted upward, eyes wide, as though she were memorizing every shape of the world so she could never lose it again. He had brought her into his home, but stepping into the city together was something different. It was public, undeniable. "Do you need anything?" he asked, breaking the hum of the car. She shook her head, though her fingers tapped lightly against Benny's paw. When they arrived in downtown Los Angeles, the sidewalks buzzed with life, street vendors setting up carts, couples hurrying into cafes, delivery bikes weaving through the flow of traffic. The scent of roasted coffee and gasoline hung in the air. Jonathan stepped out first, adjusting his jacket before circling around to open the door for Lily. She climbed down carefully, clutching his hand. The world here was louder than Malibu's silence. She shrank a little under the noise, but his grip steadied her. Inside the clothing store, racks of dresses and shoes stood in neat rows beneath bright white lights. Lily stared as if the colors might vanish if she blinked too fast. Jonathan encouraged her to choose freely, but she picked only 2 dresses and a pair of sneakers, apologetic even as she tried them on. "You can take more," Jonathan said gently. She shook her head. "Too much gets heavy." Her words landed like stones in his chest. They were stepping back onto the sidewalk when it happened. A voice, raspy, mocking, cut through the city's hum. "Well, look who it is! Thought you could disappear, huh?" Lily froze. The air around her seemed to collapse. Jonathan turned sharply, scanning the crowd. 3 figures leaned against the wall of a convenience store, teenagers, but with eyes sharpened by streets and hunger. The tallest one grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Hey, princess," he sneered. "You forgot something. People like you don't just walk away. You owe us." Lily's small hand crushed Jonathan's. She tried to step back, but the boys moved closer, circling like shadows that knew her fear. Jonathan straightened, his height and presence immediately shifting the air. "Is there a problem?" His tone was calm, but his voice carried the weight of a man used to ending negotiations on his own terms. The tallest boy spat to the side. "Not your business, old man. She's ours. She owes." Jonathan stepped in front of Lily, his body a barrier of tailored fabric and unspoken fury. "She owes you nothing. Walk away." The second boy laughed. "What's it to you? You her daddy now?" The word struck Jonathan harder than he expected. He didn't flinch outwardly, but inside something raw surfaced. He looked down at Lily, her trembling shoulders, her eyes darting as though escape was impossible. He turned back. "Yes," he said, voice like steel. "I am." For a moment, the street stilled. The boys exchanged glances, uncertain. People passed, giving wide berths, sensing tension they wanted no part of. The tallest boy's bravado faltered. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing away. The others followed, their shadows retreating into the current of pedestrians. Only when they disappeared did Lily's breath hitch back into motion. She clung to Jonathan's sleeve, her voice thin. "They used to make me steal. Said if I didn't, they'd take Benny away. Said I'd never find my mom again." Jonathan crouched to meet her eyes, placing both hands on her small shoulders. "Listen to me. They can't touch you now. Not while you're with me." Her tears spilled anyway, cutting clean paths down her cheeks. She buried her face against his chest, and he let her cry, unbothered by the curious stares of strangers. For once, reputation didn't matter. Only this small life in his arms. He guided her back into the car. As they pulled away, he glanced in the mirror. The city rolled past. But the shadows remained, reminders that money couldn't erase fear and power couldn't outbid trauma. Jonathan's mind tightened with resolve. Protection wasn't enough. He needed permanence, stability. The streets had already taken too much from Lily. He would not allow them to reach again. The Pacific came back into view as they neared Malibu, sunlight flashing against the waves. Lily leaned against the window, exhausted, Benny tucked beneath her chin. Jonathan looked at her reflection once more and understood with painful clarity. This wasn't temporary. He was already too far gone to let her slip back into the dark. The Malibu sky was flawless that afternoon, all blue and sunlight, but inside Jonathan Reed's mansion, the air was brittle. News traveled fast in California, faster still when it involved a Reed. Jonathan hadn't expected the photographers outside his gate that morning, their lenses pressed against iron bars, their headlines already writing themselves, "Billionaire CEO takes in street child." By late afternoon, the news had reached San Francisco, and by evening, Margaret Reed arrived. She entered the house like a storm in heels, her suit perfectly pressed, her hair pinned with surgical precision, her eyes gleaming with the calculation of a woman who had survived decades in politics. Margaret Reed was known in every circle from City Hall to Capitol Hill as relentless, immovable. She had never wasted time on what she couldn't control. Her younger brother, however, had just made himself uncontrollable. Jonathan met her in the foyer. He knew better than to expect warmth. "Jonathan," she said, dropping her leather gloves onto the console table. Her voice was silk stretched thin over steel. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," he replied evenly. "I've given a child shelter." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "Shelter? Don't insult me. The entire Reed name is trending for the wrong reason. Donors are calling. Journalists are circling like vultures. Do you think our father built Reed Holdings so you could throw it away on a charity stunt?" Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Margaret stepped closer, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. I've spent my life protecting our name. I've fought opponents who would shred us for a headline. And you open the door and let them walk right in. For a girl you don't know. A girl who, for all you know, could ruin everything. At that moment, Lily appeared at the top of the staircase. She wore the sky-blue pajamas Jonathan had ordered for her, Benny tucked under her arm. She froze when she saw Margaret, the stranger's voice sharp as broken glass. Margaret followed Jonathan's glance upward. Her expression softened for an instant, then hardened twice over. "Is that her?" she whispered, as though Lily were some scandalous secret. Jonathan stepped forward, shielding Lily with his presence. "Go back to your room, Lily," he said gently. She obeyed, retreating into the shadows, though her small footsteps echoed like questions down the hall. Margaret turned back, fire in her eyes. "This is madness. You don't take strays into this family. You donate, you sponsor, you send checks. That's how people like us help." Jonathan met her gaze. "People like us?" His voice was steady, lower than hers, but cutting deeper. "You mean people who hide behind money while children sleep in the rain?" "Don't twist this," Margaret snapped. "Every move you make reflects on me, on the board, on every contract tied to our name. You want to throw your personal fortune away? Fine. But don't drag the family with you." Silence stretched. Jonathan could hear Lily's door click shut upstairs, a reminder of the fragile heart caught between them. Finally, Margaret's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You'll regret this, Jonathan. And when you do, it won't just be you who pays." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't deliver a speech. He only said the one thing that mattered. "I won't regret protecting her." For a moment, the mansion held its breath. Margaret snatched up her gloves, fury in her eyes, and strode to the door. "Then pray the world doesn't punish us both." The door slammed, leaving Jonathan alone in the foyer, the echo of her heels fading into the night. Upstairs, Lily pressed her ear against the door. Benny clutched tight. She hadn't caught every word, but she had heard enough. The anger, the threat, and the quiet strength in Jonathan's reply. For the first time in her small life, someone had stood in front of her and not stepped aside. Downstairs, Jonathan exhaled, feeling the weight of legacy and scandal press hard against his shoulders. But in the silence that followed, only one truth remained. Margaret could fight for the Reed name. Jonathan would fight for Lily. And he knew which fight mattered more. The Malibu morning was bright, the ocean glinting silver beyond the glass walls. But inside Jonathan Reed's study, the air was thick. The marble floor, the oak shelves lined with rare first editions. All of it seemed too polished, too quiet for the storm now entering his life. Clara Bennett arrived at exactly 9. Her presence was steady, professional. Dark hair pinned back, a plain navy suit, portfolio tucked under her arm. She wasn't here as a guest. She was here as the law. "Mr. Reed," she said as he opened the door, "I need to speak with you about Lily Carter." At the sound of her name, Lily appeared from the kitchen, her curls still damp from a hurried bath, Benny tucked under her arm. She froze when she saw Clara's badge. The color drained from her cheeks. "No," she whispered, rushing across the marble and burying her face in Jonathan's side. "Don't let them take me." Jonathan's arm came around her instinctively, his eyes locked on Clara. "You're not taking her anywhere." Clara lifted her hands slightly, her voice calm. "I'm not here to drag her out, Mr. Reed, but procedures must be followed. Right now, she has no legal guardian. That puts her in the custody of the state." Jonathan gestured toward the study. Then let's talk. They sat across from one another at the long mahogany desk. Lily perched on the arm of Jonathan's chair, holding his sleeve as though it were her anchor. Clara opened her folder. Neat stacks of forms and legal notices. Here's the situation, Clara began. If you want Lily to remain in your care, even temporarily, you need to petition the court for guardianship. There are two options: temporary custody, which the court can grant quickly, or permanent adoption, which takes months of hearings and evaluations. Either way, background checks, home studies, and affidavits are required. Jonathan leaned back, his face unreadable. He had signed contracts worth billions, but this was different. The stakes weren't stocks or skyscrapers. They were a child's future. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Clara slid the first stack forward. Consent for full background checks, financial, medical, criminal, proof of residency, affidavit of support, and your statement of intent. Intent, Jonathan echoed. Yes. Clara met his eyes evenly. You must declare whether you seek to act as a temporary guardian, a foster parent, or an adoptive parent. The room fell silent. Lily's small hand tightened on his arm. Jonathan reached for the pen. I'm not a temporary man, he said quietly. And without hesitation, he signed. Clara studied him, her expression flickering between skepticism and something else. Maybe respect. Mr. Reed. Good intentions are tested over time. Money helps, but consistency is what matters. If you fail, the court will remove her. Jonathan's voice was steady. I don't fail the people I commit to. Lily leaned close, her whisper barely audible. What does it mean? What did you write? Jonathan turned to her, brushing a curl from her face. It means this house is your house now. Not for one night. Not until someone changes their mind. For good. Her eyes filled with tears. She hugged him fiercely, Benny squashed between them. Thank you, she whispered. Jonathan held her close, his pen still warm in his hand. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just a promise whispered in the dark of a storm. It was written into law, signed, sealed, and binding. And there would be no turning back. The sky over Santa Monica was deceptively calm, brushed in soft blues and streaks of seagulls. The boardwalk hummed with the usual weekend crowd, families with strollers, joggers pounding the pavement, vendors selling churros and sunglasses. It looked like a postcard of California life, but Jonathan Reed's gut refused to settle. Lily skipped at his side, clutching Benny in one arm and Jonathan's hand in the other. Clara Bennett had insisted on accompanying them. Lily's medical checkups were part of the guardianship process, and today was one of them. Jonathan told himself it was routine. A few tests, a doctor's signature, then home. Inside the small clinic just off Ocean Avenue, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and crayons. Lily drew horses on scrap paper, tongue between her teeth in concentration, while Jonathan skimmed unread emails on his phone. Clara filled out forms at the reception desk. It should have been ordinary, but Jonathan had built his life on instinct, and instinct screamed that something was wrong. Minutes later, when the nurse led Lily down the hall, Jonathan's eyes flicked up. The woman's scrubs were wrinkled, her shoes scuffed. He couldn't place why, but unease prickled along his spine. He stood to follow. Clara gestured lightly. She'll be fine. Just routine. But when he heard a muffled scuffle, a faint cry from down the corridor, Jonathan was already moving. The exam room door gaped open. The bed was empty. A crumpled paper horse lay on the floor. Lily! His shout cracked through the hallway. Clara rushed up, her face blanching. No! Jonathan's phone buzzed in his hand, vibrating like a heartbeat gone mad. An unknown number. he answered. A distorted voice, flat and cruel. 24 hours, 5 million, cash, or the girl is gone forever. The line went dead. Jonathan's chest burned as if he'd swallowed fire. His world, once defined by boardrooms and ledgers, narrowed to a single truth. Lily was out there, terrified, waiting for him. "We call the police," Clara urged, already dialing. "Call them," Jonathan said, his jaw tight. "But I'm not waiting on bureaucracy." He stormed through the clinic doors into the blinding California sun. The Pacific shimmered at the end of the boulevard, but Jonathan saw nothing except the city sprawled before him like a maze he would burn down if it meant finding her. He slid behind the wheel of his black Mercedes. His driver tried to protest, but Jonathan cut him off. "Out. I drive." Tires screeched against asphalt as he tore into traffic. His phone buzzed again, this time a text. "Pier, midnight. Come alone." Jonathan gritted his teeth. Cowards. The day blurred into a frantic hunt. He scoured back alleys, cheap motels, abandoned lots near the beach. He questioned vendors on the promenade, his voice sharp, his face set like stone. He searched places no billionaire had any business entering, graffiti-tagged stairwells, parking garages that stank of oil and despair. Everywhere he looked, he saw her in flashes. A curl of light brown hair disappearing around a corner, the hem of a pink jacket vanishing into a crowd. Each time, it wasn't her. Each time, his heart broke a little more. By dusk, the boardwalk lights flickered on, casting long neon shadows over the ocean. The pier came alive with music and chatter, rides spinning, children shrieking in delight. The world celebrated, blind to the storm roaring inside him. When midnight came, Jonathan stood at the edge of the pier. The waves thundered below, black and endless. A figure emerged from the shadows beneath the pylons. Lily, bound at the wrists, a gag across her mouth. She stumbled forward, pushed by two men whose faces Jonathan recognized instantly. The same ones who had tried to corner her in Los Angeles. His blood went cold, then hot with rage. "Let her go," Jonathan demanded, his voice carrying over the surf. The leader smirked. "Money first." Jonathan took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You're not businessmen. You're parasites. And if you think you can bargain with me, you've chosen the wrong man." The men sneered, but Jonathan saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Then Lily's muffled voice broke through. She kicked against the ropes, forcing the gag aside just enough to cry, "Daddy!" The word tore through Jonathan like a blade, because it wasn't calculated, wasn't coached. It was raw truth from a terrified child. Before he could move, flashing red and blue lights cut across the pier. Clara's voice rang out from behind, commanding, "Police! Hands where we can see them!" The kidnappers spun, panic unraveling their bravado. One shoved Lily forward as they bolted. Jonathan lunged, catching her before she hit the planks. He ripped the ropes from her wrists, pulling her into his arms. "I knew you'd come," she sobbed against his chest. Jonathan held her as if he would never let go. "Always," he whispered fiercely. "I will always come for you." The officers tackled the fleeing men at the far end of the pier. Shouts and handcuffs clashed with the carnival music in a surreal harmony. But Jonathan heard none of it. He felt only Lily's trembling heartbeat against his, the proof that she was alive, that she was his. As the police led the men away, Jonathan stood at the railing, the ocean spray cold against his face. He realized something stark and irrevocable. This wasn't charity anymore. This wasn't kindness. It was war. His war. And Jonathan Reed had never lost a battle worth fighting. The warehouse at Long Beach Harbor was no place for a child. Rust streaked the corrugated walls, The air smelled of diesel and brine, and rats scurried in the shadows. Outside, cranes groaned as cargo ships crept into port. Inside, 3 kidnappers argued in hoarse whispers, pacing across the concrete floor. Lily sat on a crate, wrists bound with coarse rope. Her stuffed bear, Benny, lay torn nearby, one button eye missing. She ached to cry, but instead she listened. Every word, every careless detail. The leader snapped at his accomplice. "You told her our names, you idiot!" The other man shot back. "I never said my name." "You shouted it at the docks last night," Lily said suddenly, her small voice cutting through their bickering. Her tone wavered but held steady enough to freeze them in place. The scarred man turned, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say, kid?" Lily hugged her knees, forcing her voice louder. "You work Pier 14. I heard you. You were yelling about losing a shipment of tires." The men stiffened. "And you," she nodded at the second, "you live on Mariposa Street. You told your friend your son was starting school. His name's Tommy. You smell like the same oil every night when you walk home." The leader swore under his breath, eyes darting to his partners. "How does she—" "She's bluffing," one muttered, though sweat trickled down his neck. Lily shook her head, curls clinging to her damp cheeks. "No. And when the police come, they'll know too. They'll find your houses, your families. You won't be able to hide." Silence, the kind that cracked open fear. The scarred man cursed, turning on his partners. "I told you this was sloppy." Their alliance fractured in real time, panic replacing control. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flared through the dusty windows. Footsteps thundered outside. The kidnappers whirled, shouting over each other, scrambling for an exit. The door burst open. "Police! Don't move!" Clara Bennett's voice rang out, commanding, precise. Officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Jonathan Reed was already ahead of them. He stormed through the chaos, his eyes locked only on the girl perched on the crate. "Lily!" Her face lit up, trembling with relief. "I knew you'd come!" Jonathan tore through the ropes, lifting her into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing against his chest. "I remembered everything, Daddy. I told them who they were. I made them scared." Jonathan pressed his lips to her curls, his voice breaking. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known." Behind them, officers cuffed the kidnappers, their protests drowned out by orders and the scrape of metal on concrete. Clara watched, shaking her head in disbelief. "She didn't just survive," she murmured. "She outsmarted them." Jonathan carried Lily out into the salt air. The harbor cranes loomed like silent giants, their cables creaking above. Sirens pulsed against the water, red and blue flashing across the waves. Lily tilted her head up to him, exhausted but proud. "Did I do good?" Jonathan stopped, knelt to meet her gaze, and held her face in his hands. "You didn't just do good, Lily. You saved yourself. And you reminded me of something. Courage doesn't come from size. It comes from heart." Her tired smile said everything. As Jonathan walked toward the waiting car, Lily nestled against him, her arms wrapped tight around his neck. For the first time, he whispered the word he had only thought before. "My daughter." And for the first time, it felt more binding than any contract, more permanent than any fortune. The marble steps of the family court of San Francisco gleamed under a pale morning sun. Fog lingered low over Civic Center Plaza, curling like smoke around the city's steel and glass. Reporters waited at a distance, their cameras ready, but the courthouse guards held them back. Jonathan Reed ignored them all. He gripped Lily's hand firmly, her small palms sweaty inside his. She carried Benny under her arm, its patched seams a banner of everything she had survived. As they reached the heavy doors, she tugged gently. Will they let me stay? She whispered. Jonathan knelt, smoothing back a curl damp with nerves. Just tell the truth, Lily. That's all you need to do. And no matter what, I'm here. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and paper. Lawyers shuffled files, clerks tapped keyboards, and at the front, Judge Rebecca Carter adjusted her glasses, her robe settling into precise folds. The clerk called out, "Case number 4857, petition for adoption, minor, Lily Carter, petitioner, Jonathan Reed." Clara Bennett sat at the side table, her portfolio open, her face calm but watchful. Jonathan rose, guiding Lily to stand beside him. Judge Carter's gaze was sharp but not unkind. "Mr. Reed, you petitioned this court to adopt Lily Carter. You understand adoption is permanent?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jonathan answered. The judge's eyes shifted. "Lily, could you come up here?" A hush fell. Lily's steps were small but steady as she climbed into the witness chair, Benny balanced on her lap. The microphone looked too big for her, but when she spoke, her voice carried clearly. "Lily," the judge said, her tone soft, "I need to ask you something very important. Where do you want to live? Who do you want to stay with?" Lily's hands tightened on her bear. She looked first at Jonathan, then back to the judge. Her voice trembled, then steadied. "I want to stay with Mr. Jonathan. He's not just Mr. Jonathan. He's my dad." A ripple of emotion passed through the courtroom. Even the clerk glanced up from her notes. "Why?" Judge Carter asked gently. Lily's answer came without hesitation. "Because he gave me warm milk when no one else cared if I was hungry. Because he let me keep food for later, even when he had plenty. Because he promised I'd never sleep in the rain again. And when bad men took me, he came. He always comes." Her words hung in the still air, simple and unpolished, but undeniable. Judge Carter leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she tapped her pen once and said, "Thank you, Lily. That was very brave." She turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Reed, do you accept the full responsibilities of parenthood, financial, legal, and emotional, until Lily reaches adulthood?" Jonathan stood taller, his voice firm. "Yes, without question." The judge nodded. She signed the order, the clerk's stamp falling with a resonant thud. "It is the order of this court," Judge Carter declared, "that Lily Carter is hereby adopted by Jonathan Reed. From this day forward, she is his legal daughter, with all rights and responsibilities therein." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Jonathan dropped to his knees as Lily leapt from the chair into his arms. She buried her face against his chest, whispering through her tears, "Dad." The word, fragile and fierce all at once, echoed louder than the gavel. Jonathan held her close, not as a CEO, not as a man of influence, but simply as a father who had fought and won the most important case of his life. The Pacific rolled steady and bright that afternoon, sunlight dancing on the waves like scattered coins. Yet it wasn't the ocean that marked the change in Jonathan Reed's world. It was the laughter drifting from the garden of his Malibu estate, small, unrestrained, alive. Inside the house, the refrigerator no longer gleamed like untouched steel. Its doors were plastered with Lily's drawings, rainbows, stick figures, and a lopsided horse that looked suspiciously like Benny, her patched bear. Bright magnets pinned report cards and notes scrawled in crayon. "Dad, don't forget snack time." The marble counters, once bare, now bore the mess of pancake mornings, syrup rings, forgotten crayons, and tiny socks kicked off mid-play. Jonathan had stopped instructing the staff to clear it all away. These traces of chaos were proof of something better than perfection. In the backyard, Lily chased a soccer ball across the grass, curls flying as she laughed, Benny propped nearby as a goalkeeper. Jonathan watched from the steps, coffee in hand, marveling at how the sound of her voice filled the house and grounds more completely than any storm of applause he'd ever known. Weeks after the adoption, Jonathan signed papers launching Lily's Haven, a foundation to build shelters for homeless children across California. The boardroom had been full of flashing cameras, but his speech had been simple. My daughter reminded me that sometimes the smallest request, a roof, a bed, a safe night, means more than millions. Lily's Haven is a promise. No child should have to ask for a stable just to sleep. Reporters had captured the moment, but Jonathan barely noticed them. What stayed in his heart was Lily, sitting in the front row, grinning as if the foundation had been hers all along. Back at Malibu, the most important project was already complete. Beside the garden, carpenters had built a small wooden stable, not for horses but for memory. Its beams were fresh pine, its door painted a bright blue. Over the entrance hung a sign Lily had painted herself in wobbly letters, "For every child looking for home." Jonathan helped her nail it into place, his hands steadying hers on the hammer. When they finished, Lily stepped back, her face glowing. "It's perfect," she said. He crouched beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "You asked me for one night in a stable," he said softly. "But you gave me a home I never thought I'd have again." She leaned into him. Benny squeezed between them and whispered, "You gave me one too, Daddy." The late sun bathed the garden in gold, warming the stable's wooden frame. For a moment, Jonathan closed his eyes, listening to the surf in the distance, the ball rolling across grass, and the steady rhythm of Lily's breath against his chest. This was no longer a house of glass and steel. It was a living place, stitched with crayons, soccer balls, and bedtime stories. A home. And as Jonathan held his daughter close, he knew with unshakable certainty the greatest legacy he could ever leave wasn't measured in towers or fortunes. It was here, in the laughter of a little girl who once asked for a night in a stable and gave him the only wealth that mattered. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Jonathan and Lily's journey. If their story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us keep sharing stories of hope, love, and second chances.